Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on Big Blue View Radio, part of your SB Nation family of podcasts. Please like, share, and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts across the Big Blue View Radio network. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the New York Giants coaching staff as Brian Daboll tries to fill out his coaching staff after moving on from several coaches and having a couple of coaches decide to take other opportunities. And in particular, we're going to talk about the hiring of new offensive line coach Carmen Bricillo from the Las Vegas Raiders. And here to help me do that is Bill Williamson of SB Nation's Silver and Black Pride. Bill, thank you very, very much for hopping on for a few minutes.
Sure. Thank you, Ed. Appreciate it. Always fun.
Hey, so Carmen Bricillo, just a quick overview of Bricillo, offensive line coach for the Raiders for the last 2 years, I believe, under Josh McDaniels.
Right.
Just a quick overview of what the Giants are getting here in Bricillo.
Yeah, I think they're getting a professional offensive line coach, a guy that knows his way around the job. He's a professional. Like I said, he's been around a long time. He's part of that Patriots tree, and that's where, Brian Daboll, they know each other from there. So I wasn't surprised when that happened. There was reports that right before the end of the season that the Raiders were going to let some coaches pursue other opportunities as they start this coaching and GM search. He was the first one to get a bite, and he's the only one to go so far. And, it was interesting. The Raiders Pat Graham is getting some interviews for head coaching job. He was asked to get, there was an interview request for a defensive coordinator job, and the Raiders did not give permission for that, but they did get permission for Bricillo. I don't think that's an indication that they didn't like Bricillo. I think that they want to really keep their defensive side intact when they figure everything out, and then they're going to probably make some changes on offense. So I think they say, hey, this guy has an opportunity. He knows he's going to people that he knows. Let's give him a chance.
Well, that kind of makes sense because Josh McDaniels, who was fired midseason, was an offensive coach.
Right.
They weren't real happy with the overall performance on that side of the ball. Right. So that makes sense. But one of the things that is noteworthy about Bricillo and about the Raiders is that offensive line, if you buy into Pro Football Focus rankings and grades and all of that, and I always take those with a grain of salt.
Sure, me too.
Pro Football Focus graded the Raiders offensive line 10th best in the league in each of the last 2 seasons. And the interesting thing about that is a little bit like the Giants offensive line, there's only one real sort of big time player on that offensive line, and that would be Colton Miller, the left tackle. Right. Does that, in your mind, speak to the effectiveness of Bricillo as an offensive line coach?
Yeah, I think certainly. I think I could keep going back to he's professional. He knows what he's doing. I think he did coach those guys up pretty well. Like you said, there's not a lot of names on that offensive line. And they really did pretty decently. There were some games like every offensive line in the league that they struggled. They didn't run block as well this year as they did last year when Josh Jacobs had 1,653 yards to lead the NFL in rushing. Jacobs kind of struggled this year. I don't know that maybe it's on everybody. They had some games where they really blocked well in the last 2 years, and they had some games that they didn't. But I would say that overall it was probably maybe a little over better than average offensive line. And again, I think he gets credit for that because there's not a lot of names. They got Greg Van Roten in free agency in May after the draft this year. And, when he got signed, you looked at it as a guy who's on the bubble, and he started every game at guard. And he played really well, and I think he had his best career ever, season of his career, and I think Bricillo gets credit for that. So I think the Giants are in good hands with this guy.
Interesting. And one of the things with the Giants that's been an issue offensive line wise, Joe Shane, the GM, has drafted 4 offensive linemen in 2 years. He drafted Evan Neal in the first round in 2022. He drafted Josh Azudu in the 3rd round in 2022, Marcus McKethan in the 5th round in 2022, and John Michael Schmitz in the 2nd round in 2023. You can make an argument, especially when you look at Evan Neal and Josh Azudu, you can make an argument that none of those players actually improved over the period of time that they've been with the Giants. So I'm curious. I think Dylan Parham is a guy that the Raiders drafted a couple of years back who I liked, but I think he was a late 3rd round pick. Thayer Munford is a guy that's been their swing tackle for a couple of years. But I'm just curious if you can look at the young players on that line, and tell me, if you think that over the past couple of years that they've performed well and gotten better. That would be something that Giants fans would be interested in, just because the development of these guys, I think, is one of the reasons why the Giants moved on from Bobby Johnson.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And, you hit the 2 guys in Parham, and Andre James, the starting center, was hurt for a couple of games late this year, and Parham played center and played pretty well. And he played well. He's been mostly a guard. He's been a day 1 starter since he got here, but a lot of people think that he's going to end up being a center. So it's going to be interesting to see where he ends up. But yeah, he played well both spots. And Thayer Munford, a 7th round pick 2 years ago, played pretty well when Colton Miller was hurt, and they felt comfortable about Munford playing left tackle. You're playing left tackle in the NFL as a 2nd-year player, being a 7th round pick. I think that's pretty encouraging. So, yeah, to answer your question, I think he did pretty well with the young guys.
Interesting. And just, I mean, this may seem like an off the wall question, but can Raiders offensive linemen pick up a stunt?
I think you're going to be okay.
Yeah, because I think the next time we watch a Giants offensive line pick up a stunt might be the first time in the last couple of years. So
I think this guy, I'm not going to sit here and say he's an elite coach he's an elite offensive line coach, but I think you're getting a solid guy. And I think Duvall knew what he was doing when he jumped on. He knew he had a chance at him, and he jumped quickly, right? I mean, it was just Tuesday or Wednesday of last week. There is a reason for it. I think he feels very comfortable with it.
I think the Giants are just collecting bald guys.
Yeah, well,
seriously, whatever it takes. There you go. All right, Bill, let's talk about a couple of other guys on that Raiders coaching staff who are of interest to New York Giants fans. And you mentioned Pat Graham earlier, but let's hold off on Graham for a minute. Let's talk about Antonio Pierce.
Okay.
Obviously, former Giants linebacker, considered a coach on the field, did, by all accounts, a great job for the Raiders, when Josh McDaniels was fired and he was named interim head coach. Mm-hmm. Max Crosby has come out and said he would request to be traded if Pierce doesn't get that job. What is Mark Davis doing? Why hasn't he just given Pierce that job yet? And in the end, is he going to give that job to Pierce in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, the tea leaves changed a lot, and the last couple of days, I think it's looking that way. That is, he is going to get the job. Yeah, it's been strange because we went into the offseason looking. It's probably going to be Pierce or Harbaugh, and then they also have the general manager job they have to figure out too. And like Pierce, interim GM Champ Kelly is considered the favorite, but they've talked to 6 people for that job, and they tried to get Adam Peters involved too, but he went to Washington quickly. So they had a pretty big search, and some of the names that they looked at is like, well, this guy's not going to want Pierce, and just because he's going to want to bring in his own guy, it's no shot on Pierce. So you're like, what are they doing? Are they really that interested in Pierce? I think when Max Crosby came out and said what he said, and he didn't definitely say, I'm going to ask for a trade. He said, everything's on the table. But, I talked to some sources that he's going to be really upset if his coach doesn't get the job. And he's just because he wants stability. They wanted Rich Bisaccia, the locker room wanted Rich Bisaccia 2 years ago in the same situation. And he did a better job than Pierce. He went 7-5 and took him to the playoffs after the John Gruden fiasco. Pierce didn't, he went 5-4, but they didn't get to the playoffs. So you can say Bisaccia did a better job. And still, Mark Davis went away from the interim coach and he got McDaniels. So Crosby doesn't want the mistake to happen again. And he publicly said it. And there's a lot of pressure on Mark Davis now. And now if they do end up hiring Harbaugh, I think Max Crosby could calm down. I don't think it's the end of the world. I mean, everybody's emotional. You see what happens. You let things settle down. So I think that is still possible, but it is looking like Pierce is going to end up being the coach.
And you would like that? I mean, he did do a good job. He did seem to have the backing of the players.
I thought, I mean, they were 5-4. They were fiery. The one thing I'd be worried about is, in the NFL, it's just not all rah-rah every week. And you can't win on emotion every week. And I think he'd have to grow as coach. I think, he would have to bring in a really good offensive coordinator. There's been rumors and reports that maybe it's Cliff Kingsbury. I don't know if that, you got to get a quarterback. You got to figure that out too. But I think Pierce, would the Raider aura is so big to this franchise and the fan base, and that will never go away. The 1970s Raiders were a special bunch, and they want that feeling again and still. And Pierce has embodied that. He's really embraced that. He said, he grew up in the Los Angeles area when the Raiders were in Los Angeles. And he, when he became the interim coach, he said, I was born for this job. So he's really buying all into it. He's also getting interest in Tennessee and Atlanta as well. So anything can happen until it does, but it's certainly looking this way. But to answer your question, if he, grows as a coach, he's only 45 years old. If he gets a good offensive staff in place, I think it can work. Again, I think his model is Dan Campbell in Detroit, another fiery guy, and it works for him. There doesn't seem to be an expiration on his fire. It works in Detroit, and he's a former player, and so I think who really connects to his players. So I think that Antonio Pierce, if he follows that blueprint, it could work.
Campbell's another guy who played for the Giants for a little while, and there have been times over the last few years when I know people thought that perhaps Campbell should get an opportunity to coach the Giants as well. So I know I think Giants fans would be happy to see Antonio Pierce. I don't know that Antonio Pierce, if he doesn't get that job, I don't know that Pierce would be a guy that would want a defensive coordinator job, but that happens to be open for the Giants as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where he would turn if he doesn't get. Defensive coordinator is probably his next best move. If he doesn't get a head coaching job, and again, he's a candidate in 3 places. I mean, he needs to continue to grow as a coach if he doesn't get the Raiders job. So I think if he got a defensive coordinator's job, that would be the next best thing for him.
Absolutely. Hey, Bill, let's talk a little bit about Pat Graham, about the Raiders' current defensive coordinator. Now, you turn back the clock a little bit. Graham was defensive coordinator for the Giants under Joe Judge. Graham interviewed for the job that went to Brian Daboll. Brian Daboll thought initially that Pat Graham was going to stay with the Giants.
Mm-hmm.
Graham basically thought better of it. He went to the Raiders with McDaniels, and I can understand that partially because he interviewed for the Giants job and didn't get it. He and Joe Judge were very close. Giants, fired Joe Judge, his best friend, or hit one of his best friends in the coaching business. So maybe he was uncomfortable staying in New York with the Giants. What I don't know at this point, and maybe you don't know either, but I'm curious. I don't know if there were any bridges burned between Graham and the Giants, between Graham and Daboll. I'm just curious if you have any idea, how Pat Graham still feels about New York.
I do not. He's a he's a professional, bright guy. I think he gets. I don't look at him as being overly emotional. I think he understands the business. So I don't sense that there's hard feelings, but I can't 100% answer that. I do find it interesting that, as I said earlier, that the Raiders denied permission for a team going after him as defensive coordinator. It might have been the Giants, because how many existing teams have openings right now? I'm so focused on the Raiders right now, but there's not many, right?
Right.
So it could have very well been the Giants. He could have went after Bricillo and Graham.
Right. I haven't seen Graham connected to the Giants, but it could well be. Pat Graham's a very different defensive coordinator than Wink Martindale, just in terms of how he builds his defenses. He tends to build them back to front and tends to use scheme and disguising coverage to try to confuse quarterbacks, rather than just throw caution to the wind and throw pressure at quarterbacks. I'm curious your thought on the job that Graham did in the last 2 years with the Raiders.
I think there's really a lot of improvement this year. A lot of improvement after McDaniels left. I'm not sure why, because he was in control of the defense anyways. It might have been just everybody was loose. A guy, Malcolm Kuntz, third round pick from Buffalo, in his third year, had 2 sacks in his first 2 years combined. He had 8 sacks this season, and most of them were late in the season. Some guys improved, and I think that is, good credit to Graham. It's the reason why he's getting some head coaching job. The Raiders defense has been awful for years, and it got better, and it didn't give up many points down the stretch. And they were very fortunate. They played some really bad offenses this year. Really bad. It's terrible quarterback play. I think they played against more backups than starters this year. But that's just the way, that's the way it goes. So next year might be a different story. They might play, the NFL changes, right? They might play better quarterbacks next year and they might struggle, but they played well this year and they got a lot of pressure. Max Crosby is a brilliant player, an elite defensive player. I don't think he gets enough credit for that. And Patrick Graham was a big reason why he, all these guys had success. So yeah, again, there's a reason why he's getting job interviews. He's interviewed in, he's got an interview in Seattle, and he's already interviewed in the Chargers.
It's interesting. Mike Kafka, the Giants offensive coordinator, also has an interview, or had an interview, in Seattle. I think Kafka also had an interview in Tennessee. So maybe it'll be a former Giant in at least in Seattle.
Yeah,
we'll have to see how that goes. Anyway, Bill, thank you very, very much for a few minutes. Thank you for dropping some knowledge on Carmen Bricillo and on a couple of other former Giants coaches, Pat Graham and Antonio Pierce. So thank you very, very much for the time.
I appreciate it. Anytime. Thank you.
All right, and thank you for listening, Giants fans. Please stay safe out there, take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.